is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. You know, a short pip. Little something. Yeah, about anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today. Hey everyone, welcome to another D6G pip. This time around, I would love to share with you all two things, really. My GenCon 2021 experiences. I am actually recording live from GenCon right now as we speak. I'm actually, live from GenCon is a misnomer because A, this is pre-recorded, but I am actually sitting in my hotel just a scant couple blocks away from the Indianapolis Convention Center, where I've been attending GenCon now for the past 3 days. It's now Saturday night, technically 4 days if you count Wednesday. I actually came in on Wednesday. So I'd love to share with you all my instant thoughts while I'm actually still here. It's Sunday morning. I said Saturday night. It's actually Sunday morning now. See, time is a strange thing right at GameCon. For those of you who've been to GameCons, you understand what I mean. But anyway, it's actually Sunday morning. I have a couple of quick meetings this morning with some folks, and then I'm going to be flying out. So for all intents and purposes, my actual con part of the adventure here is kind of drawing to an end. But I did want to share with you all my thoughts on that. Also, I picked up, as you might imagine, several games. I think pent-up demand is sort of a theme we're hearing in the world here as we hopefully get to the other side of this pandemic situation. And my personal pent-up demand was I hadn't been to Gen Con or any conventions, really. I think I did go to a couple smaller ones like Captain Con, but this is my first real Gen Con situation in since 2019. So a lot of pent-up demand there, a lot of very exciting things, had a little bit of a budget, so did pick up a few things I will talk about. But in purposes of this episode, in addition to my sort of high-level thoughts of Gen Con, I also want to share with you a little bit of a detailed review on a game called Drop Dungeon, my really unexpected surprise hit of the convention. And I hope these guys got the attention they deserve because it's such a cute game. Anyway, so we'll talk more about Drop Dungeon in just a bit. But first, Gen Con 2021. So, interesting story about deciding to go to this. I am the only person in my local posse, as it were, who went, including my family. So it was just me, going by myself. And this is sort of a last-minute decision. I didn't really all in to go to Gen Con until probably, September is when Gen Con was this year. So first of all, Gen Con was late. So Gen Con made a couple of interesting decisions this year. One, they really, 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 really wanted to have a show. Understandable. I mean, these things cost a lot of money. They're very complicated to plan. I can only imagine what it does to their overall business model and budget to lose 1 year, never mind 2. And I know they did it virtually last year, but let's be honest, it's just not the same. So they definitely wanted to have one this year, and probably wisely, they moved it from August, which is normally when Gen Con is, and it will be again next year, the beginning of August. They moved it to September, probably just under the assumption, I'm guessing, I don't have any inside information, that maybe things would be even calmer on the COVID front, and people would be more comfortable traveling and going to a giant convention. So that's what happened. And they announced this springish, right? So we all kind of knew back in spring this was going to be happening. And I still was like, well, but are they going to cancel it? Is it going to be good? And as summer went along, I got more and more sure that it was going to happen. And I also got more and more sure that I really wanted to go. Even though I knew that some manufacturers wouldn't come, that a lot of people wouldn't come. And Gen Con had already said they're going to be limiting ticket sales. So I was like, tell you what, if I get to the end of July, early August, and there's still tickets left, which there probably won't be, but if there are, I'm going to go. Because by then, I think we'll be pretty sure that it's going to happen, and we'll kind of know the state of the world. So, and by the way, I do a lot of business travel still. So I've already, made the risk assessment on personal travel. I am double vaccinated, so those kinds of things weren't as big of a deal for me. I'm also not in a high-risk group. I don't live with anybody in a high-risk group. So for me, the risk profile of actually traveling right now is extremely low. I'm in much greater danger of dying in a plane crash or in a car crash. So for me, it wasn't really a matter of personal risk. It was really more of, is it worth the investment to travel out there and the time and the money? So anyway, Decided to do it, and as it got closer, there was tickets available. They actually, as far as I can tell, they never ran out of 4-day passes. I think you could buy 4-day passes right on the way into the con, like day of, if you wanted to. So if you wanted to come out here on Saturday and just check it out, you could have just splurged on a 4-day pass or 1-day pass. So that was kind of interesting. So I was already like, wow, it's going to be light. So I was getting a little nervous about that. The fact that it was kind of a weird double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I'm like, woo, I got tickets to GenCon. On the other hand, I'm like, ooh, only 2 months out, and I was able to get tickets. And supposedly they're limiting the supply, so interesting. And then I was like, well, can I get a decent room? I actually did the room first to make sure I could have a place to stay. And sure enough, when I went, it was interesting. When I went to book, all the very close hotels, and when I say very close, all the hotels like literally connected to the convention center by skyways or walks and things, those were all booked. So that made me feel good. Like there'd be a good chunk of people there. But the perimeter hotels that are maybe like 1 or 2 blocks or 3 blocks away, like less than a 15-minute walk, right, which is not a big deal, weren't booked fully. They had a lot of rooms booked, but they weren't fully booked. So I got a nice little room at a Courtyard Marriott that's like, I think 3 blocks away. It's one of the longer walks I've had, but still less than 15-minute walk, so not a big deal. And now, by the way, Indianapolis is full of these little scooters. You probably see them in your local cities. These little rental scooters that you just rent on your app, and they're powered. You just drive around. So actually having a 3-block walk with the scooters everywhere was no big deal. And the scooters are honestly kind of fun, and it was a beautiful sunny weekend. So not a problem for scootering, although I enjoyed the walks to get the exercise in because I was eating way too much tasty con food. Don't mind telling you. Anywho, so got my room books, got my tickets, and I'm going to GenCon. And I was still like, I don't know, is it going to be good? Is it going to be fun? And then I was like, since I'm not going with any of my friends, and I was hopeful. One of the reasons I really wanted to go, in addition to just going to a gaming convention and getting that sort of, that feeling, was I was really looking forward to, I've been very privileged as being part of the D6 generation and going to all these conventions to have built up what I consider really good long distance relationships and friendships with many people in the industry, or many people who, like you, who are listeners who come to these events, or just random folks who I see at these cons every year, but never see again. Like they're not people that ever come, I never see for any other reason except that I'm at a gaming convention, right? And I was missing these people. I mean, they're kind of like an extended circle of friends, and it's been a long time. So I was really hoping to see them. But I wasn't sure how many of them would actually come, because we knew that people were making last-minute decisions on this stuff based on their own personal safety and feelings. So I wasn't sure how many were going to come, and I'm like, man, there's a chance. And I also knew the vendor hall would be slightly smaller, or a lot smaller. Who knew, right? So I'm like, there's a chance that I'm going to be bored. Like, there's a chance that the vendor hall's super small. I see the whole thing on Thursday. I'm going to be there all 4 days. Maybe there's not a lot of people with availability. Maybe they're nervous. So what am I going to do? So I better sign up for a few GenCon events. And normally, I really don't sign up for that many. Normally, I go to I spend a lot of time in the vendor hall. I just love walking around the vendor hall. For those of you who follow me on the D6G Twitter feed, you'll notice I don't know. It's a weird cathartic thing for me. I love to walk around, take pictures, and tweet them. So it's a weird thing. I don't actually do that picture tweeting thing, by the way, because it's good for the show. Although it gets a lot of traffic and people check it out, and I get a lot of compliments. People thank me every time for doing it because they like to vicariously participate in the show with me. I do it because I like to share stuff. Like and Craig and Rafe will tell you this. When I'm at a con with and our family will tell you this too. I'm at a con with people. I'm kind of like that little kid with a dad in like a candy store. Hey, look at that. Hey, look at that. Hey, look at that. And I just want to share it all. I'm like, hey, look at that. And so being able to tweet and talk about it is this little kid thing I get to do. And so I love doing that. So for me, that's like super fun. I don't know why. I have no idea why I like to do that. And so I do the vendor halls, and I also go around like the gaming areas and just take pictures of all the cool games being played and the miniature terrain. And I just loved it. It's weird. I just love to do that. So anyway, so for me, that's like a big thing to do. That usually takes most of my time. So I don't like to schedule too many events. But I was kind of like, wow, but it's there's not going to be much there. So I might run out of time. So maybe I should book a few events. And so I started booking a few events here and there. And as I did this, I don't play BattleTech much, and I love BattleTech. So I booked a couple of BattleTech events, Alpha Strike, and they also have this cool BattleTech scenario called Grinder, where you start with a light mech. and you play, and it's a big table, like, I don't know, 8, 10 people playing. And then if your mech dies, no problem, you respawn, but you go up a weight class. So you start in a light mech, you die, then you respawn as a medium mech, then you die, and then you respawn as a heavy mech. Just fun. And plus you get a chance to try all the different mech parts, kind of neat. And then I played Alpha Strike, which is I think I've talked about this in the show before. It's a much lighter, faster version of BattleTech. But it isn't really faster because it's way faster. I mean, the mechs have much less points on them. They're easy to kill, but the design, and they play really fast. You just basically roll dice once to shoot. You don't fire all these different crazy complicated weapon systems usually, but it's designed that way because it's designed to be played with a much larger scale game. So you're meant to be fighting lance on lance or several lances with tanks and aircraft. So it's meant to be an army scale game, whereas opposed to original BattleTech is really a squad based game. You're fighting, you're traveling with maybe 1, 2, maybe 4 mechs because the game just gets really slow, but fun. So that was a lot of fun too. So really enjoyed those. And then also I booked I finally got in to Super Robo Rally. So every year, as long as I've been going to GenCon, there's been this crew of folks who creates a giant Robo Rally game. And for those of you who don't know Robo Rally, it's a classic board game. It got reproduced a few years ago. It's been around forever. I think you can still buy it. But the premise of this game is each player controls a robot, and using a card deck mechanic, you program in 4 moves for your robot. Go straight, turn left, turn right, that kind of stuff. And then the game board is basically a factory floor covered with all kinds of gizmos that move your robot here and there and everywhere, like a conveyor belt or a smasher, dangers, lasers, all kinds of crazy stuff. And of course, the goal of the game is to move your robots around and get to various objectives. And of course, if you program your robot, but then someone does something unexpected and their robot runs into your robot, it moves your robot. And then, of course, now your whole program is off and crazy things ensue. Well, these guys have taken that concept and they've just supersized it. And they've built an entire game board out of this super shiny base. And it's probably 20 feet by 20 feet. I don't know. It's pretty big. Maybe it's 10 by 10, 20 by 20. It's a big game board. And then they've built giant Lego robot versions of the robots, and they're all crazy, and they're all done with basically Technics Lego and using Mindstorm components. And so they built these working robots, and over the years they've improved the technology. I was chatting briefly with one of the folks who runs the event, and I was asking him how's the technology changing. He said, well, we used to have players would get cards and we'd scan the QR codes from the cards, and that would tell the thing what to do, but that got cumbersome. And so eventually we upgraded all the robots to the Raspberry Pi, and every player now gets a little affordable, like old school iPhone, like a couple generations ago iPhone, and you use that to program your robot. So it's all Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. It's really cool. So you basically they got like, I don't know, it felt like 15 players all sitting around this giant board with all these giant Lego robots, and we all locking our moves on our phone, and then the robots move. And I've watched this for years, thought it was fascinating, but I could never get a ticket for it because it's so interesting, and all kids love to play it, and families love to play it. It always, like if you're not jumping on and reserving a slot in this game, and it runs every single day for like 12 hours, like a half hour a session, so they cram it in. There's lots of opportunity, but it's just so popular at GenCon, a con that sometimes gets 80, 90, 100,000 people. You just fills right up, right? You can't get a slot. But this year, because the attendance was much lower, I found I was able to get a slot in this thing literally 2 weeks before the convention. So I was like, whoa, I'm going to get that. So I did that, and that was a blast. It was just as much fun to do in person. It was even more fun than I expected. It was really a lot of fun. I'm going to try to do that every year if I can sneak in. So that was fun. So as I was doing this event registration stuff, I found myself getting super excited, and I found myself getting more excited than I expected. So GenCon came, and one other little fun thing happened. So Stephen Bonacore reached out to us, the podfather himself, the man who claims to be retired, but I'm going to explain to you what's happening, and you tell me if he's retired, okay? I'm going to have to go to the audience of this one. So he reaches out to me and says, hey, I got a buddy, a friend who's launching a new game, $1 million script. It's launching at GenCon. It's a party game where teams of players pitch movie scripts to a player who's like the business executive, the Hollywood executive, right? And it's kind of fun. It's kind of wacky, and it gets more fun if you have sort of crazy extroverted personalities. And they want to have sort of a launch event at GenCon, like a session where people can come in and watch some people who have really good extroverted personalities play this game. And so I'm tasked with being the executive, Stephen Bonacore is, being the executive, but also I would love to get some of my friends in the podcasting industry to be on the teams, because I know you guys are really funny and extroverted, and I've asked these people, Russ, would you be interested? And Craig, and so Craig wasn't going, but I said sure, I'll do it. So I got roped into this thing. It was a blast. We did that. It was a panel, so I was actually on a panel, which I did not expect at all. So I got to be on this panel, and we played this game. Z from the Dice Tower there, a bunch of folks. I don't want to name everybody because there's a bunch of folks there on the panel. There's about 50 folks or so in the audience, maybe 60, and they had cameras and they were doing the whole thing for the game launch, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good time. It's a fun game. Basically, it's a really fun. Basically, you're given a premise, right? Like, first, you have to come up with a hero of your movie, and there's cards that are drawn that tell you the hero's foibles, right? And then each team comes up with their version of this hero, and then the team has to pitch to the executive. What I like about what makes the game sort of interesting is there's these cards that are like role cards when you're making your pitch to the executive, right? So there's a card that says, for example, you must be the narrator. There's another card that says sound effects, and there's another card that says music, and there's another card that says, one-liners, right? And then each player in your team is assigned, you guys, you have like 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to come up with your plan for the hero, for example. And so while you're coming up with this plan on your team, you're supposed to assign these cards. So one player is going to be the narrator. So like Z might have been narrating, and then I might jump in and say like, hey, I make a sound effect like Z, like they enter the dark room, and I'll be like, ooh, that kind of thing. But it was a lot of fun, and we're trying to create one-liners and do this all on the fly. And it was, and then what's interesting is after each team like makes their pitch for the hero, the executive then decides he awards points first of all to each team. So you may get 2 points for your hero, and the other team might get 4. So if the other team's hero wins, now you're all stuck with that hero for the rest of the game. So that has been the chosen hero. Then you got to come up with a villain, and both sides pitch a villain, and then whoever wins that, now you get this villain. So you may get, the long story short is you may get a hero that doesn't really match the villain, or each team is now being forced to, their next pitch has to sort of incorporate what came before. So you do the hero, you do the villain, you do a sidekick, you do sort of like the crazy situation they get into. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun little game. Definitely worth checking out if you do like a good party game. But also, it was just a fun experience. So thank you to Stephen Bonacore for that. I think hopefully the game had a good launch. The folks seemed pleased. If you're interested in how that went, I know they're going to be releasing the recording and the audio for this later. And I'm sure we'll all retweet it when it comes out. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you, Steven. I still don't believe you're tired, because I tell you, the guy was everywhere, as always, and he was behind like every counter and every booth I ever saw him in. So for a guy who's retired, he was really working the floor. I'm just saying. I don't know. Anyway, so that was a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm kind of jumping around, but you get to GenCon. So I was on all these things, and they were a lot of fun. I did my events. I did, I got to be on this panel. So far, kind of normal. Except that I could get to the events. The other thing that was not normal was I got here Wednesday, and I go to get to the will call booth. Now, see, because I picked everything last minute, right? I didn't even sign up for the convention till like inside 2 months. So the deal with Gen Con is if you sign up early enough and you pick your events early enough, everything gets mailed to you, which is awesome, because then you just show up at the con and you do your thing, including your badge, right? But if you don't do it early enough, which was me, I did it inside, really close to the convention, you have to go to what's called the will call window to pick all your stuff up. Now, everybody ends up having to go to the will call window for some reason, because there's always something that happens inside the last 2 months. You add another event, or you had someone else in your family decided to come, or whatever, right? So you end up always going to the will call window, which as a result, the will call window line is famously long at Gen Con. Like, it goes forever, and you're always looking at like the first 1 or 2 days of the con. Like later in the evening or on off times, it's not a big deal, but at the very beginning, the first day, because everybody's got to get their stuff. So on Wednesday night and Thursday morning, the will call line is always massive. Like, it stretches just all around the convention center. It's usually like, I don't know, an hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes even longer wait. So I'm heading over. I'm like, crap, I got to go to the will call window. Here we go. And I go to the will call window. Now, there were people there, don't get me wrong, but the line was inside the stanchions. And for those of you who've been to Gen Con, you will be as shocked as I was. The line was like inside the stanchions, so it didn't even leave the actual will call area. So it looked like a normal, rational ticket booth. So I walked in. Now, there were people kind of everywhere milling about, and I got the energy was there. It was Gen Con. People were ready to go. But the will call line was very short. And this made me concerned. I'm like, oh, is there going to be people here? I'm like, I'm excited. I mean, on the one hand, you know, it's like, woohoo, there's nobody here. I get to walk right in and get my stuff. On the other hand, there's nobody here. It's just going to be fun, right? So I got my will call stuff, cautiously optimistic, but a little nervous, right? So got all that. It's Wednesday night. Everything's fine. I walked around the convention center a little bit, and I was starting to feel a little better about things being fun because I could feel the energy coming. It was good to be back. Had me back in a long time. And by the way, outside of Indy, still all the signs were up. Welcome GenCon, on all the light posts out here in the city. And I could walk into they had some evening play going on in some of the bigger, larger halls. Those were still set up. That was cool to see. That made me feel pretty good. And then I walked out the side of the convention center where the food trucks normally are. And I had forgotten they were doing the GenCon block party. And it was where the food trucks normally are there. And they had these huge signs set up. It said big dragon on it. And it said, welcome back to Indy GenCon, and it just was kind of cool. And then there were all the food trucks out there. And I realized that's where everybody was. The place was hopping. And they were doing basically a giant beer party, welcome back everybody. There was all kinds of crazy food. There was crazy drinks and everything happening. And that really felt good. And the energy there also was fantastic. And again, I ran into Bonacore there too. I hadn't been in here at the convention for like an hour and a half, and I already ran into Stephen Bonacore. The man was everywhere. I don't know how he does it. I really don't. So that was awesome. That was fantastic. And so did all that. Had a great Wednesday night. Feeling pretty good. Still a little nervous about the vendor hall. And then Thursday morning gets here. So Thursday morning, so for those of you who've been to GenCon a lot, you know how this works, right? So Thursday morning, the big event Thursday with the first real day of the con. Now, events run pretty much, I don't want to say 24 hours, but they're pretty long, like early morning events. So actually, there are some events that literally do run overnight. But for the most part, they start at like 7 or 8 in the morning. And they usually run scheduled to like 8, 9, or 10. There's some events like musical acts and things in the evening at 9 or 10 at night. Anyway, so there's those things happening, but the big thing, the thing everybody wants to go to at some point is the vendor hall, the expo hall, right? This is where all the different game companies are there selling their stuff, right? Or different companies in general. Anything that's in the sphere of geek-related activities is going to have a booth there, at least in the past. And to get into the vendor hall, when it opens right at 10 in the morning on Thursday, it's a big deal to get into the vendor hall early for a lot of people. And the reason it is that many of the game companies there launch their games, right at GenCon, and they don't have enough copies for everybody. So you're going to have a situation where they're going to sell out. So the super hotness often sells out in the first 10 minutes in GenCon. Now, some of the vendors will have different supply drops coming in from UPS on different repeating days of the week. So like Thursday, they've got 300 copies of the game, and then Friday morning they'll have 300 copies, etc. So it's worth coming back to them. But I didn't go in with any preconceived notions. I didn't do a lot of research on what was going to be the hotness this year. I didn't really care. I just wanted to see stuff. And I'm kind of the guy who wants to find the thing I don't know to expect. Now, that's not to say I don't fall prey to hotness, right? So, for example, I have a very clear memory. One of my favorite games I ever got at GenCon that was a hotness that I didn't know about was Bunny Kingdoms. So the year Bunny Kingdoms came out, which has been a family hit. I mean, since we've had Bunny Kingdoms, it's probably one of our most played games in the family. When Bunny Kingdoms first came out, the year it came out, I did not know it was going to be great. And I saw it Thursday, and it sold out instantly. And I played the demo, and I was like, oh my God, my kids would love this. It's full of bunnies. I think it's really interesting. It's amazing gameplay. And so I knew it was coming back the next day. So that was one I went and fought for. I came back the next day. I got in line early. I was like, wow. So anyway, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happens, right? And so we're here at GenCon. I'm like, is it going to be this crazy? So I go in, and I'm expecting, again, this is usually the way the line is structured to get in at opening day to the vendor hall at GenCon is they've got it sort of set up where there's this massive mob at the main door. They pick one of the main vendor hall doors throughout the day, later in the day, all these different ways to get into the vendor hall. But at the beginning, they focus down to like one or two. And then they have this massive line that goes, people start lining up for this thing at 6, 5 in the morning. And it goes all the way from that door, and it doesn't open until 10. So they wait from 5 hours to be the first in here. It goes from that door, and he goes all the way down the full length of the vendor hall, and sometimes even out past the end of the convention center. And it can be a massive wait, right? Crazy, huge line. One of the big deals of the convention. So I get there, and sure enough, near the doors, there are a lot of people. There's a good mass, but that's it. It doesn't stretch back out into the vendor hall. And I look at this and think, man, I could after these doors open up here in about 5 minutes, it's going to take about maybe, because these doors are massive, it's like going to take about maybe, I don't know, a minute, maybe two for all these people to flood in. And then I can just walk right in. There's no need to get here early. And I didn't plan to go early. I didn't feel like fighting the crowds. I just wanted to experience it this year. I didn't have a specific game I needed to get. And I wasn't even sure what vendors were going to be there. Like I already knew going in that Fantasy Flight Games and Privateer Press, and I think Asmodee and a couple other big ones just weren't going to be there. They just decided not either they couldn't come because a lot of their folks were overseas, or they decided not to come, because travel and risk and, all that. So we already knew that a lot of the big companies wouldn't be there. So I wasn't even sure, what was going to be worth running around anyway. It wasn't going to be some like giant Fantasy Flight Star Wars Legion release anyway. So I just basically strolled in, 10:02, 10:03, just walked right in. It was kind of awesome. And again, I was like, before I could go in, I was like, is there anyone going to be in the vendor hall? Like there's nobody here. But I'll tell you, as soon as I walked in that vendor hall, it was awesome. Walked right in and it was fantastic. It was just like GenCon had always been GenCon. The vendors went for as far as I could see. There was the signs hanging from the ceiling. As I walked in, Catalyst Game Labs had the catbird seat. They were right at the center door. Weird Miniatures and Malifaux was like right next to them with their massive cool themed booth. And as I just walked in, and there was a line to get into the Catalyst booth because they were launching the new Battletech Reinforcements box sets. And there was just line going all the way around their booth. And I was like, yes, it's still happening. It's still GenCon. The energy's still here. And I could just see that it was going to take me the better part of 2 days to get through this vendor hall with any detail, which is what you want to see. I mean, that's why you go. That's why you pay the money. That's why you come, because there's just very few places. There's Essen, there's GenCon, there's a few others, Origins, where you can see this many different games and game systems and people that are interested in gaming all at once, right? Mostly in the board gaming world. Because you go to PAX, it's similar, but it's video games, right? There's a lot of these in video game space. There's not as many of these at this scale in the tabletop space. So it was back. It was awesome. And I knew I was going to have a good time and just had a wonderful time walking around the hall, seeing all the games, seeing all the super excited, it's interesting because when you go normally to a convention like this, the first day, Thursday, all the people working the booths have good energy. But then by, Friday and Saturday, they sort of get tired because it's a lot of work to be sitting there demoing games all day to people, just constantly asking, how does this work? How do you play this game? How does it go? And they're trying to have the energy, right? They're trying to be excited, but you've done this like 50 times. Plus, you pair that with, this is not the only con a year they go to normally, right? Normally, they've just gone to Origins. They've just gone to, they're going to, or just came to from DragonCon. And DragonCon was just, literally a couple weeks ago. They're going to this other con. So they've been to like 10, 15 cons already, and now it's GenCon. And GenCon, yeah, sure, is the big daddy, but still, they've been doing all these cons, so maybe they're tired, maybe they're, But this year, because there hadn't really been that many cons this year, or very few, and because they were just so excited to get back, the energy was just off the charts from everyone. They were just so excited to see people. I'm sure many of the vendors weren't sure, with GenCon limiting capacity, were there even going to be people here? Were there going to be a big mob of gamers screaming as I ran in? There was. It wasn't as big, but there was a mob. I mean, here's the funny part. If you had seen this GenCon in like 2008, you'd have been like, wow, what an amazing convention. It only felt small because it's been getting bigger every year. And I was talking to a lot of people about this. It really felt like a GenCon of like 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, where it was smaller but still massive, if that makes sense, and almost better because while, no, it was better. It was better than GenCon of 2019, I would say. And the reason is, I don't know if you remember me talking about GenCon of 2019, but I think we said several times, and Craig has talked about this before, 2018, 2019, 2017, it was starting to feel like GenCon was getting too big. The lines were just too long. You couldn't move. You literally, it was shoulder to shoulder, sardine packed in the vendor hall, trying to, walk through the vendor hall and get between two stalls. And it was just becoming less fun. Right? It was just too many people. This was not that. This was the opposite of that. It was still massive. It was still a spectacle. There was still more stuff than you could possibly take in. And yet, there was no line at will call. You could walk down the vendor hall and even swing your backpack and not hit a person. You could take a minute and talk at a booth, and there wouldn't be 50 people standing shoulder to shoulder trying to push you past a booth. You could actually chat with the game. He didn't have to yell because, yes, it was loud, but it wasn't like, so many decibels you couldn't hear. The energy was great. The people are great. I think the game manufacturers and the game designers are just so excited to be face to face with folks again. I know we've all been on Zoom. I know we've all been communicating. It's not the same. It's just not the same to be there toe to toe with a person, saying hi, looking them in the eyes, seeing the passion they have for their game, and sharing that passion with them. I'm just gonna get goosebumps just talking about it. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm weird, but I just really I was so excited to be back, and I could tell the energy was the same. And the other thing was, for me, I got to connect with a lot of folks as well. It was just really good to see. I already talked about Stephen Bonacore and Z from Dice Tower. I got to see Seppi. Seppi was there doing his thing, working one of the booths, and Seppi's on our Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Got to have a great dinner with Seppi. Hung out in the evening with him. Reconnected with Jeff Tidball, who I felt really bad. Sorry, Jeff. He's been on the show before. And I was just like, yes, I remember you. But it took me a minute. But then I finally reconnected. I heard his voice more, and we started talking. Amazing industry insider, super smart guy. Got to play some games with him and Seppi. Hung out, had a couple drinks. Also had reconnected with Dan Yarrington over his things going on. I reconnected with Doc, and his kids were visiting the venue, GenCon, so I got to say hi to Doc and hang out with his family. And that was just a lot of fun because, of course, I see Doc virtually all the time, but I haven't seen Doc in person in forever, and I never met his kids, so that was a lot of fun. And just bouncing to all kinds of people throughout the convention, saying hi to folks. It was just a really good energy, and I just really enjoyed it. And I know traveling right now and everything, I know everybody's got risk, and there is a risk profile you got to consider. But for me, that positive energy, that positive life experience, there are risks you need to take to make life worth living, is the way I think about it. And for me, this was one of those. So really had a wonderful time. Would I do it again? 100%. If this is how Gen Con is going to be going forward, it's a nice little reset. I have a feeling, though, that a lot of people are going to hear about how fun this was, and Gen Con next year will be a little more crowded. But I'm probably going to be back because I just had too darn much fun. So that was my experience with Gen Con. I really, really enjoyed it, and worth every penny to get out here. But also had perfect weather. So walking outside and doing all the thing. A couple of sad notes. A couple of my favorite food haunts have changed a little bit. So Bee Coffee, which was right across the street from the convention center next to the food trucks. And it was really fun because it was a great little privately owned coffee shop, a little family-run coffee shop. And they were all super nerds because they'd all be dressed up to Star Trek, and they had Star Trek-related stuff on the walls. And you could tell that even though they were obviously, hamming it up for Gen Con, you couldn't have all these kinds of subtle Star Trek references and not be total Star Trek nerds. So it was awesome because it was nerd on nerd, discussions. It was great. I don't think they survived COVID. They were all closed. All their stuff was there, but all hadn't been used in months. So I'm hopefully they're just still on hiatus, but I had sad feelings there. The Ram, which was the bar that we've talked about for many times, that was all themed up for Privateer Press every year. Of course, Privateer wasn't here this year, but the Ram is gone. The Ram is now a new restaurant, so that changed ownership, which was kind of sad to see. So a couple of places changed, but that's life, right? So, but overall, the experience was fantastic, and I would definitely do it again. Now, what about the games? What did I actually get? What games kind of got me excited? I'm going to go to my my loot pile picture here, because I do have a loot pile picture. I'm going to try to find it on my phone here so I don't miss my any of the games I actually end up getting. But basically, until I can find it here, I'm having trouble finding. Oh, here it is. Yes, here we go. That's a blurry version of it. I'll get it in a second. But in any case, so in my loot pile, so the games I got, I'm going to try to go from memory here first of all. So one of the games that impressed me, so I actually ended up getting a couple games that I knew were awesome, and then I got a couple games that are experiments, and then I got an awesome find that I hadn't played. So I always buy one game that at least one game that I was just sort of an impulse buy, haven't played the demo, just looked at it, seemed kind of cool, and I grab it. And usually these are about 50-50 in the end. Sometimes I ended up, giving them away or selling them. Sometimes I end up becoming a favorite and I love them. So you never know. But I kind of like just like that impulse buy of grabbing a game and being like, let's see what happens. But then I got a couple that I really I'm very confident about. And then one that I demoed that I had no idea I was going to like. From a distance, I wouldn't have normally bought it, and I've loved this thing. So let's talk them through. So first of all, the first game that caught my eye of the convention was a game called Windward. And the reason it caught my convention is that my attention is the components and the world are right in my wheelhouse. So I actually saw this game before I even got into the vendor hall. It was set up on a table in there's a big gaming area where the gaming companies do their demos but also run their events. So it's like the places where the miniature war game events happen and the Magic tournaments happen. There was a Dice Throne tournament happening there. So that kind of stuff, right? So if you sign up for events with companies, they're usually in this big hall that's just adjacent to the vendor hall, but it's also open longer hours because it's always open late and early because people are always running events and playing games in there. So one of the tables being demoed there was this table with Windward on it. And what made it look interesting to me was the board was round and it was like a giant planet, like a gas giant planet. And the fluff of this game, and there's these little plastic Age of Sail looking ships, but they look a little tweaked with little like fins and things on them. And these Age of Sail ships with fins are on flying stands, right? And so it's a game where there's flying Age of Sail ships, right? Which is always a theme, like Treasure Planet from Disney, the Disney Treasure Planet movie, for example. And so those games always appeal to me because I just love the concept of Age of Sail ships flying, right? There's something about flying ships that just gets me, Star Blazers, that stuff. So they had these ships there. And then I also noticed they had and so it's models, right? So first of all, round planet, flying ships on flying bases models. So I'm already in, and they can see the different ships are, the sails are molded in a different plastic color for each ship. So the hulls all look kind of the same, but the sails are different. So there's a green ship, a red ship. And then also there are these creatures on flying stands floating around that kind of look like giant flying whales. So imagine, but they're sort of sci-fi whales, right? So imagine this, so it's very, again, like Treasure Planet-y, right? There's this very like flying ships. And so the fluff of the game and the world they've created is that there is this world where it's got a very thick, dense, gaseous atmosphere, which makes air buoyancy even easier. And so life has evolved that can kind of fly around floating in the air like these whales, but also they built these ships, right? And so the game basically is kind of like, I haven't played it yet. This is one of the ones I just bought without playing it, but it looks kind of like a Merchants and Marauders sort of situation where you're going around multiple paths of victory. You can even harvest the whales for their teeth and things to make victory points that way. Or you can, get your guns good and shoot other ships, things like that. So I have to check it out in terms of gameplay, but I bought it because the theme was so good. The models were super cool. The components were cool. And then also I got suckered into their book. So they actually, because it was a Kickstarter, they had a hardcover art book done by the designer who did the world. And not all that stuff made it into the game, but it was all the concept art that they had lying around as they thought about the game and did the game. And that was just gorgeous. And I wanted this because in a lot of my D&D settings, I have these kinds of ships because I just love them. So like on my Eberron world, these kind of ships exist. And so I just like the ideas for these sorts of things, like leafing through them because as a dungeon master, they give you really cool ideas. So the book was cheap. It was like $10 for this really cool hardcover art book. So I got that too. So I ended up getting the game and the hardcover book. They had a little con deal going on for that. And so that's my just total impulse. I had no idea the game even existed. The game has existed. I guess it actually came out in early 2020 because that's when the Kickstarter finally fulfilled. But it hasn't got a lot of buzz. I have the game could be terrible. I don't know. But although they walked me through, the gameplay seemed good. I haven't played it yet, but it seemed interesting. So it seems solid. But I would think the art and the models would have gotten a lot of buzz, but I think it's another one of those victims of 2020 where they're a small company. They don't have a lot of ability to get the word out. And because there's no conventions for them last year, there was no way they could just show it off. Because what was interesting was I tweeted this pretty early on. It's got one of the most likes. And when people would see the game, and they were in a little tiny booth in the corner. And this is one of the things I think was the big win for this GenCon was because a lot of the bigger players weren't there, the Fantasy Flights and the Asmodees and stuff, it gave room for the little guys. And so the little guys came because they need to make money, and this is their bread and butter, right? So they were there, and I think a lot of them got some love, which is great, like these guys that make Windward. So I hope they got a lot of love. I did go back by, and their game stack was full on Thursday when I ended up buying a copy of it. And when I went back Saturday, their game stack was down a good amount. I would say below half. So I'm hopeful they're doing okay for themselves because, again, they're out there. They're putting themselves out there. They've got a cool-looking game. They definitely, world building awesome, components fantastic, if the rules are even halfway there, I think the table presence is so good, you may not care. I don't know, but I'm hoping it's good. So more on Windward. When I play Windward, I'll give it a detailed review because the game definitely deserves some love. So that was the first one. The second game that I bought with no insight to how it plays is a Slugfest game. So Slugfest, these are the guys that make Red Dragon Inn. I think that's the right name of the game. It's a very famous game. It's been around forever. I never got into it. I don't know why. It should be my jam, but it's not. But they had a game. So I'm kind of a sucker. I think I've said this on the show before. I'm a sucker for dungeon-related games, right? So I'm really a sucker for two kinds of things. Anything with ships pretty much gets me. Okay, three things. Ships, 4X, and dungeon crawling. Dungeon crawling, I almost kind of collect. I'm dangerously close. I don't consider myself a board game collector. I do have too many board games, so that's a thing. My wife will tell you that in an instant. I do have too many, but I don't consider myself a collector. I feel like I tell myself I have them all, so I have variety to play with my friends. Right? That's what I tell myself. But when it comes to dungeon crawl games, I do acknowledge, or dungeon related games, I do acknowledge that I kind of get them sometimes to have them with the wacky mechanics because I just like dungeons so much from doing Dungeons and Dragons since I was very little that I think it's just sort of ingrained in my head. So I get attracted to dungeon crawling games. So there was this, and I like super unique ones, as you'll find in a minute. I actually bought two very unique dungeon crawling games. Well, I call them dungeon crawling games. They're not dungeon crawling games. They're dungeon related games. So the first one I got was what is it called? I think it's Dungeon Decor. Anyway, I'm describing it as HGTV meets Dungeon Decorations. So basically, it's a tile laying game, kind of in the Castles of Ludwig sort of realm, but basically the overlord of the dungeon is dead, and you've been charged with redecorating the dungeon. And on the cover art of this thing is sort of the Slugfest art of one person's got like color chits from a paint store, and someone else is like a vampire, and they're like basically redecorating the dungeon. And so basically you're laying tiles to try to create the most lovely decorated dungeon. I know it's weird, but Slugfest makes some really funny games, and so I was kind of like, and it was affordable. I was like, and it was a small box. I was like, okay, I'm gonna get that just because it's so wacky. I didn't even play it. I don't know how that one is at all. So that's probably, and I don't know. It was the highest risk purchase, let's put it that way. But I'm kind of excited to try it out. I'm very excited to try it out because it's just this wacky idea, and I like those kind of things. Plus, my daughters kind of like this kind of stuff too. They're kind of like into the whole like crazy wacky, being the overlord on the evil side of the dungeon. Kind of thing, but also like decorating is just sort of funny. So they like that kind of humor will work with them. Even though they're much older, we still play games whenever they come back into town and stuff. So that's that. So my two crazy purchases that I have no idea if they're going to work out were those two. Then as I'm going around, there were several hotnesses of the con. And the hotnesses, there were many of them. Sleeping Giants I did not get, but there's a huge line for that one. That looked interesting. That was a big one. But the biggest, well, not the biggest, but there were a couple big ones. One of the ones, I got to actually go by Kurt's booth, Kurt Covert for Smirk and Dagger Games. He's been on the show several times. Love Kurt. He's such a nice guy. And again, he's one of those people that, I consider my extended friends bucket. And so it was so nice to see him again. And he seemed to be doing great. I guess Smirk and Dagger's been doing wonderfully through all this, which is awesome. Actually, that was sort of a theme. A lot of the game companies are saying that while the supply chain has been a challenge and getting everything else has been hard, board games have been doing very well. Tabletop gaming in general has been doing very well during the pandemic since you can't go out. So playing with your family, maybe playing with your folks in your bubble. And so they've been, and people aren't traveling right now, so they've got a little extra disposable income. So they're spending on this stuff. And so pretty much most medium to large game company folks I talked to are all saying, yeah, we've been actually, I kind of feel guilty. We're doing great, but I know a lot of people aren't, so that's good to see. So the industry seems to be in really good shape, which is great. So talking to Kurt, I was asking how he was doing. He was like, man, Russ, he goes, we got one of the game, we got lucky. We got one of the games. Well, not lucky. It's obviously, I say lucky. He called it a luck maybe, but I don't like to ascribe success to luck because I think a lot of people don't appreciate what goes on behind the scenes for any successful person. All the long hours, extra work, uncertainty, late nights, extra planning. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the background to create a lucky moment, quotes. But one of their games this year, Night Cage, did very well, and it deserves to have done very well. So I watched the demo of this thing and ended up getting a copy. It is first of all beautiful, but the premise of it is that you have a candle and you're walking through an unknown area, and as you go forward, you discover things. They come into the edge of your vision and you see them. If you return and go the other way, the things that were on the edge of your vision go away because you only see your bubble. So if you move and leave, what was there a minute ago might not be there if you were to go back. So it's kind of got this creepy little vibe, but it's got a really interesting mechanic with this light moving system. And it's a co-op. And it's just so unique, such a unique idea and a unique concept. And it did great. It was selling like crazy, huge lines at Smirk and Dagger. It was doing really well. It was so great to see. And they have so many cool things in the pipe. Kurt was demoing me a new game going to the Kickstarter soon based on, it's an environmental awareness game, which is really cool. It's you have a large plastic oil rig in the middle of the table. And this is coming soon. This is no, Night Cage is different. But it's got this large plastic oil rig, which is actually what he's calling a 4-way dice tower. And below the oil rig are like these circles of the ocean. And so each round you drop these black dice into the top of the oil rig, which is the dice tower. And as they bounce out, they get sent out the way the tower is designed. They can be bounced out in different directions. So it's not a dice tower with one exit. It's got like basically a whole bunch of exits. And so they bounce out in different directions into the game board, which is the ocean. And these black dice are where the oil spills are. And then as they go into the ocean, they get assigned into rings based on the numbers they rolled. And in those rings, there's little sea creatures that may be getting oily, like turtles and things. And then you have to go around and try to rescue the animals and also clean up the oil and also stop the oil leak, right? So really interesting mechanics. I just saw a couple rounds played. It was really interesting. Kurt went through the whole thing with me really quickly, but that also looks really fascinating. So if that kind of game appeals to you, keep an eye on Smirk and Dagger's upcoming Kickstarters as well. And also, I'm going to play some Night Cage when I get home. I think my daughters are going to love this game, and I'll give you guys a review of that in the future as well. So those are some of the big things I found. A couple other things. The other game I bought, and this was dangerous because I'm not sure it's all going to get home. I'm looking over at my suitcase right now, and I can fit everything into my suitcase, but I'm worried about the weight limit, so I might be paying some fines here at the airline. But the other game I got. So I was going by one of the booths, and Ankh was there. So Ankh is an Egyptian-themed game from Cool Mini or Not, designed by Eric Lang. Now, Eric Lang is an amazing game designer. He's done some great stuff. And one of my favorite games of his is Blood Rage, which is fantastic. He's been sort of doing this. I haven't really been following all this, but they were explaining it to me. He's been sort of doing this series of 3 different games. They're not connected in any way, except that they have similar mechanics to each other in that there's like this, it's like the Blood Rage series, right? I forget what the middle one was, but Ankh is the third in this series, where it sort of like takes the core mechanics of Blood Rage, which is sort of like area control, right? And to a different perspective, now you're in Egypt, and each player is an Egyptian god, and you're using the area control mechanics to increase the powers of your god, and then you sort of like, fight or whatever. And it looks really cool, but of course, not only is it an Eric Lang game, but it's also a Cool Mini or Not game, which means the components are stupid cool. Like the miniatures for the gods. Oh my goodness. They're like, when you look at these things, I put pictures up on Twitter. They had them out on display. Now, CMON was not there, by the way. They were another one of the large companies that didn't make it out. However, there was I'm sorry, I missed the name of the distributor who was there, but they had a bunch of games. But they were the ones that actually got the Ankh and the first expansion to GenCon. Now, Ankh and the expansion aren't actually releasing to the general public until the end of October. So this is another one of those little GenCon treats where you can get it basically a month and a half early. The Kickstarters are filling now, and then everybody will have it in game stores in another month. It's the hotness. If you look on Board Game Geek, everybody's talking about it. Ankh's been sort of there was no like risk buying this game because A, it's Eric Lang, B, it's Cool Mini or Not, and C, everybody knows it's great. So this was not a purchase that was risky at all for me. It was just like, well, I should buy something hot, and it is Cool Mini, and look at those models. Oh my goodness. So, I could have waited a month and not had to carry this thing home in my suitcase. But you're at GenCon. What are you going to do? You're going to buy the game. That's what happens. So I bought it. And this is where having my hotel just a nice couple blocks away, first time I really noticed because I walk all the way back to my hotel. But can't wait to get into that game. It just looks so good. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. And of course, it's going to play great because Eric Lang. So I'm very excited about that one. All right, a couple of the small things I did grab. I'm a miniature gamer, so I got more terrain. Monster Terrain was there. They're the guys that make these cool plastic, hard plastic trees where the trunks are all like a dead tree. You got a dead, pre-painted dead tree trunk. And then they have these almost look like cones that go down over the trunk, but they're all curvy and they're done up to look like painted leaves. So you put this on top of the dead tree and now you've got a cool leaf tree. And you take it off and now you got a dead tree. And I got a fall version set of that and I got a summer set of that. And I think Craig has some of this stuff too. And they had all the rocks. I think Craig backed the Kickstarter a little while ago, but now they have all the stuff just out there and you can grab it. They were also the guys that did the Cyberpunk miniatures and they were showing those off, which is kind of neat. But I did get a bunch of terrain for all the miniature games because we've been playing a lot of miniature games. Craig, myself, and Joe and John from the guys you hear on the D&D version of this. We get together and play a lot. We just finished up Song of Ice and Fire. Now we're doing Star Wars Legion. So you can't have too much terrain, right, as a gamer. So got some of that. And then last but not least, as I mentioned, I'm playing a lot of D&D. And of course, D&D supplements are really cool right now. Kobold Press was there. Kobold Press is probably my favorite. Not counting Wizards of the Coast, who obviously make all the D&D stuff. Kobold Press was my favorite D&D supplement stuff because it's so many of them were involved in the early D&D stuff. They just get it right. It just feels like it's done by Wizards. It just feels like it's D&D because it is, because a lot of their stuff actually becomes canon. So they're just really good out of the box. And they had the collector's edition of Rise of the Drow there, which is this amazing Drow based both campaign, but also sort of just adds so much backstory and background to the Drow. And I just always have thought the Drow as a people were really cool in the Dungeons & Dragons universe. And it's this really cool version of it. It's thick, hardcover, built-in bookmark sort of thing and the cover art was just so cool. And they had a little deal for getting it at the con. It was still not cheap, but I wanted that, so got that one too. And I had pent-up demand, so there you go. So those are the big things I got. So last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about. This episode's going a little long, but hopefully I'm giving you a good feeling of what my Gen Con experience was. The last thing I wanted to share with you, I wanted to sneak in a little game review in here, which is a game review for the game Dungeon Drop. So Dungeon Drop, I got this because I didn't expect to get this. Okay, so I didn't know anything about Dungeon Drop. I didn't know anything about Phase Shift Games, the company that makes Dungeon Drop. I had never heard of Dungeon Drop before. And again, this is one of those games that probably got me because a lot of the big guys weren't there. And so I had a little more time to go back, to the smaller booths. And this one I found Friday afternoon. So I had already gone by this section of the con a couple times, or the expo hall, but I was just walking by. And at this time I went by, there was just a little bit of a gap in the table. And I noticed these guys, and it says Dungeon Drop, and it's just a really small booth. Like there's not a lot of art, not a lot of anything going on there, but they had these little demo, the cardboard demos table set up. And they've got these, sort of neoprene mats that look like a dungeon grid on them. And they've got a little border around the edge of the neoprene mat in cardboard. And then they're picking up these just bunches of little cubes and dropping them into the dungeon, just like right into the mat. Just blink, the little cubes are bouncing around. And then the people are staring. They're staring at the board with intensity that is like really interesting. Like they're really looking at the board. And they're going, oh, wow, I really want to pick up that room, but because there's some gems, there's a ruby and a sapphire in there, but man, there's a troll and a kobold. I'm going to take like 4 points of damage if I pick that room up. Is that worth it? I'm like, what? All I'm looking at is, what are you talking about? There's like cubes at a table. I don't know what you're talking. But then next to the table, they have these little square cards. So how the game works is, so I got a demo, and then I'm like, oh God, I gotta buy this game. So I bought it, and the game. What's also cool about the game is it comes in a little tiny cube. So the cube is not even like 4 inches. It's 4 by 4 by 4 cube, basically. Maybe 5. I don't think it's quite 6. But anyway, so you got this little cube, and there's actually one expansion for it. They actually had 3 cube-based games, but only 2 of them are Dungeon Drop expansions. So there's Dungeon Drop, the core game, and then there's Drop Deeper, which is the expansion. I think the expansion is totally worth it because it adds a monster mechanic you definitely want. Each game box is only $20, so 2 of these is 40. And then you don't need the dungeon neoprene mat or the little walls that go around the edge of the dungeon. You don't need them, but you want them. So I bought them. But anyway, and then I proceeded to try this game. So I got it because that looked interesting. It was very unique. And again, back to I like to collect dungeon crawling games or dungeon related games. And this looks so unique because you're basically dropping cubes is the gameplay mechanic, right? So I got to try this. So I grab this thing, and then I knew I was going to hang out with Seppi in the evening with a couple of his friends. So I grabbed the game, figuring we go hang out with Seppi, we have a couple of drinks, and maybe we try this dungeon drop game, see if it's as fun as it looked. So how does it work? So what you do basically is the game comes with a bunch of different colored cubes. Some cubes are clear, some cubes are solid, some cubes are plastic, some cubes are wood. It's all kinds of cubes. But in addition to that, you get a bunch of square cards, right? Pretty good sized cards, great gloss, fantastic artwork, by the way. The artwork is all sort of this sort of chibi sort of look going on here. And inside, if you have both the supplements, you get a huge deck of what I'm going to call races, but you're basically the kind of creature your character is. And there's a bunch in there. Of course, there's your classics, your halflings, your dwarves, but you also have got like your merfolk and your lizard people and all kinds of craziness. So there's like a deck of these things. There's many of them. And then so you're going to get 2 of these cards in the beginning, right? You're going to get dealt a race card, and you're going to get dealt what I'm calling a class card. I'm going to be getting the terms here wrong. On the class card, there's an ability, right? And it's got a name like Ranger or Wizard or Fighter or Rope Master or whatever, right? And what you do is kind of like Small World, the way the cards are designed, they can be put together and sort of their titles connect, right? So you'll be like a Merfolk Ranger, right? Or a Lizard Rope Master kind of thing. And each of these cards, what they do for you is the race card also has the number of wounds your character has, your hit points. And then it also has, on the bottom, each of these cards has an ability. So by getting these 2 cards put together, you're going to basically have 2 abilities. Okay, so that's setting your character up. And the other thing that happens is you're also going to get a quest card. Now, the quest card is kept hidden. So your personality card, your race card, and your ability card, your class card, those are public knowledge. They're face up, they're coolly connected, and everybody sees, oh yeah, you're the Lizard Ranger, right? But then you're also going to get a quest card. Now, your quest card is basically going to tell you, you keep that hidden, but it's basically going to tell you the value of the various gem cubes that you're going to be collecting throughout the course of the game. So at the course of the game, you're going to be collecting cubes. That's basically what's going to be happening here. And this quest card is telling you, yeah, there's blue cubes, there's pink cubes, and there's white cubes. They're translucent, and those cubes are all the gems or the valuable stuff, right? And the victory points each of those is going to be worth at the end of the game is going to depend on your quest card. So some of the quests would be like, yeah, white's worth 1, blue's worth 2, pink's worth 3. Another quest card might be, well, blue's worth nothing to you, pink's worth nothing to you, but whites are worth 4 each to you, that kind of thing. And then there might be some text underneath that says, hey, by the way, if you kill a lot of goblins, small monsters, we'll give you, if you get at least 6 of those, we'll give you plus 10 victory points kind of thing. So you might have a sub-objective, but no one knows what those are, right? So only you know those. That's kind of your mission. Now, in addition to being able to score points for your mission, which is basically centered mostly around those 3 gem stones, colored cubes, there's also a bunch of cubes in the game that are shiny gold cubes, like little, almost look like they're metal. They're not metal, but they're like shiny plastic gold cubes. Those are actually supposed to be gold, and gold cubes are always worth 1 victory point for everyone. So gold cubes are always worth something, right? The clear gem cubes, the value depends on your card, right? And then the other way you get points is there are monsters cubes, and the colors of the cubes indicate what kind of monsters they are. Those are generally wooden. And like the little goblin cubes, the little green cubes, they do damage to you, but they're worth nothing to collect. They just get in your way. But the troll cubes, they do 2 points of damage, so they're worse than goblins, but they also give you 2 victory points if you collect one of those. And other monsters have victory points related to their cards, right? So you'll figure that out as you go. So basically, that's how you're going to collect victory points to win the game. Your primary way is through your quest card related to the clear gem cubes. Your secondary way is by killing monsters, or maybe there's bonus features on your card. There's also the gold cubes are always with 1. And then the third way you can get victory points is there are chest cubes. So are these little brown and gold, they look like little, they have chest art on one of the sides. They are brown and gold cubes. And on one side, it looks like a little chest, but on the other sides, it looks like D6 results. And so if you collect a chest cube, that's awesome. But there's also little key cubes. And so the chest cube is worth nothing to you at the end of the game unless you have a key cube at the end of the game also with you. So basically, if I haven't made it clear yet, most of the game is going to be involved collecting cubes, and you're trying to collect the right kinds of cubes. And if you collect a treasure cube, you're going to want to have also gotten a key cube by the end of the game, because if you do, at the end of the game, for every matched pair of key and chest, you can roll the chest, and it's a D6 basically, and whatever that roll is, it adds to your victory points as well. So a chest is really worth 2 to 6 victory points, but the one side is blank, so you could have an empty chest, right? So that's how the chest part works. Those are the primary way you get victory points, right? So how do you collect cubes? So this is the interesting part. So we've got our character set up, right? We've got our race, we've got our class, and then we've got our mission card also. So we're ready to go. That's the beginning of the game. The last bit of setup you got to do. So that part's really fast. The other bits of setup you got to do, there is a deck of cards for these big, and the cards are beautifully, quality's awesome. They're big square cards and they're shiny. And there's also this pile of cards that are the monsters. And you only get this pile of cards if you get the expansion. I highly recommend the expansion. It has a lot of coolness. Because the expansion also comes there's a deck of monster cards, and each corresponding monster card has a large cube on it with cool, silk screened art on the cube of full color art of a monster that kind of matches the card, right? And there's like these liches in there and gelatinous cubes and all kinds of stuff. And the card describes what they do. So these monsters all have special rules. But the core mechanics of the game is when you're setting up, you got that monster deck over there. But in the very beginning, all you're going to do is going to take all the cubes in the game, except for the monster cubes, the big colorful monster cubes. Those go with the cards. But all the other cubes, they basically go, you're going to put them all out on the table in front of you for a moment. And you'll notice there are larger cubes and smaller cubes. They look the same. They're the exact same materials, exact same colors. They're just, some are big and some are small. You're going to take all the big ones and set them aside and put them, the game box, by the way, is a giant cube, as I mentioned earlier, and you can slide it apart. So when it's open, the game box lid becomes sort of a dice bucket. So what everybody was doing at the game, so I started doing this too, is you take the lid and you take all the large cubes and you put them in the box top. So now you've got a little bucket of dice that are for later. And then you've got all the smaller cubes. So what you're going to do is pick up all the smaller cubes. One of the players is going to pick up all the smaller cubes, and they're going to drop them all right in the middle of the table. Now, here's where having the mat I was describing to you is helpful. You don't need the mat to play. You can just drop them all in the middle of the table. If you've got a bouncy table, like a hard table, they're going to bounce all over the place, which could be fine, but they might bounce to the floor. It might be better off with a little neoprene mat or something soft or a cloth on your table to keep them from bouncing too far, or create some little borders on your table. But this is where the fun part is: if you buy the neoprene dungeon mat and the cardboard dungeon edges, it creates a little table like for you where it's neoprene, and then also you got your little dungeon walls so they can't bounce too far. This keeps them going off the table, right? So you want to have that. You drop the cubes in the middle of the table, and then you're going to figure out who goes first. Now, the way this works in the first round, and the game's got some nice tokens that you give to each player, because it's not just clockwise order. It actually goes in initiative order initially, and then it goes by weight carried after that. More about that in a second. So basically, we're ready to begin. So the first thing that happens is you're going to activate the dungeon, which means you basically turn over the top monster card, and you're going to see what monster it is now. You're going to find the corresponding monster cube that matches that monster, and you're also going to just drop that in the dungeon. Now, there's rules for dropping. So dropping is a keyword, and basically it means you're going to drop a cube from a height of 6 to 12 inches over the table. It's a drop. It's not a throw. It's not a toss. You can't put any side angular momentum on it. That's not in the rule book, but that's my rule. You just got to drop it straight down, and but anywhere you want. So you can kind of be strategic where you drop it in the dungeon. That's it. So player one just dropped all the small cubes into the dungeon, and then someone's going to turn over a monster card. They're going to drop the monster into the dungeon, and then each monster card has a special monster effect that triggers during this round of the game. So you're going to read whatever that effect is and do it. Sometimes that effect is everybody takes a point of damage if you've got more than 2 health. Sometimes that effect is, gather all the monster cubes that are within a certain range of this creature and drop them back over him. It's like a little posse kind of thing. So anyway, you do that. And then now you're ready to take your turn. Now you're still probably wondering, how does this game even work? All you've done is drop cubes. Well, here's how it happens. So player one, they're going to look at the board, and they're going to try to, the first thing they're going to do is they've got abilities on those cards I mentioned. The very first thing they're going to do is they're going to drop more cubes into the dungeon. So remember, I mentioned there's a box lid full of the larger cubes. Remember, these are the same colors as the smaller cubes, just to separate. So the size is just the starting dungeon plus things you're going to add to the dungeon. That's all the size does. It just sort of separates the deck, if you will. So player one's going to take the lid of extra dice. He or she's going to pick up some number of dice depending on player count, right? So if there's less players, there's more dice, and they have a chart for this. So in a 4-player game, you'd pick up, without looking, take 3 cubes out of the lid and then drop them into the dungeon. You're adding more to the dungeon, right? And that's each player, when they go, they're going to do that. So the dungeon's always going to be getting more cubes into it. And then the current player is going to look at the dungeon, and what they're trying to find is they're trying to pick a room, I'm using air quotes here, a room to explore. And a room is defined as a triangle you create, a visual triangle you can create, between 3 dungeon pillars. And a pillar is a cube that is on the board. That is the gray cube. So there's a set of cubes that are gray, and they're plastic, and they look like a little bit marbly. Those are your pillars. So what you're doing is you're going to look on the board. You're going to pick any 3 pillar cubes, right? And you're going to draw an imaginary triangle, right, in your head around these pillars. And you're going to be able to pick up, because your hero is basically going into that room, air quotes, and you're going to pick up all the cubes that are inside that room you just defined with the 3 gray pillars, right? So if I look at my 3 pillars and I'm like, ooh, that room's pretty cool. It's got a lot of the pink gems, and I need some pink gems. I'm going to go pick that room up. Now, there's a couple caveats to creating your room you want to think about. The first rule is the room you create cannot contain a pillar. So you can't create a room that'll let you pick up a pillar, right? So you can't pick 2 or 3 triangles that'll have another triangle and another pillar in the middle. That's not allowed. So you got to create a room. There's no pillars inside of it. Okay, that's the first rule. The second rule is you can pick up monsters. So for example, if you create a room and it's got a green cube, a little green cube, which is a goblin, and it's also got a little pink gem and a little white gem, and you look at your mission card, oh, I need pinks and white gems. I'm going to pick that room up. Well, you take the goblin, you have to take everything in the room. So you take the goblin and the cubes, right? When you take a monster, there's a little list of the different types of monsters in the game, and the monster does some damage to you. So goblins do 1 point of damage. So you would mark on your character sheet, you can put the little cube right on it, and there's also tokens for wounds. You can mark right on your character sheet that you took a wound when you collected that goblin. And the downside is goblins aren't worth anything, right? Except for some quests they are, but most of the time goblins aren't worth anything, but trolls are. Trolls are bigger green cubes, but they do 2 wounds. Now, the reason wounds matter is you can never kill yourself. So in other words, if a room has monsters in it that would take your health to 0, you can't pick it up, right? So you can't choose a room. You can't voluntarily pick up a room that has too many monsters in it. Now, what's interesting is the more powerful monsters, the big giant ones that have cards with the cool art on them, those guys do a lot of damage. Some of them do 2, 3, 4, 5 damage. Some of them do 8 damage or 9 damage. And the interesting thing about that is most characters don't have that many hit points. Some do, but most don't. So it seems like it's impossible to pick up like the Lich King. However, there are other cubes you can get besides just treasure cubes that have special effects. For example, and they're called consumable cubes, by the way. So for example, the armor cube, which is cute, it has it's a little tiny cube with silk-screened armor breastplate on it. The armor cube, if you happen to have picked up an armor cube, either in this current room or earlier in the game, you can use, I'm using air quotes, the armor cube to block 3 points of damage. So let's say you've got 5 health and you really want to get that Lich, and that Lich does 7 points of damage normally. Well, I could discard the armor cube to pick up the Lich and only take 4 points of damage instead of 7, right? So I would be alive then, and I would get the Lich, and the Lich monster card actually has special scoring rules on it that could give you a lot of victory points, right? So getting the big powerful monsters can be good. Plus it removes their effects from the game, which is also nice. So that's how you pick things up, right? Oh, by the way, when you use a consumable, so for example, the armor cube, or the other consumable that's pretty common is the health potion, which heals you for 3. Another one is really cool is the magic shield. It's like this glowing shield, translucent, sparkly shield cube. And when you get that cube, you can discard it to remove damage from one monster that you pick up this turn, which is awesome. That's the way you can kill pretty much any creature in the game. But when you consume it, you just, what they call, it's another keyword, redrop it in the dungeon. So if you were to use the health potion, you would then hold it back over the dungeon and just drop it back in for someone else to collect and use. So basically those things are recycling, right? So that's pretty much it. And then, so I'm going to take my turn, right? I'm going to go ahead. Oh, but by the way, while I'm looking for those triangles, right? In my turn, after I've dropped the new cubes in, remember, I'm going to pick 3 out of the box and drop them into the dungeon. During my turn, while I'm looking for a triangle, I actually, before I pick up, I actually can pick one of the abilities on my character card to activate before I choose my room. And these abilities in these character cards are really interesting. For example, one of them is a magic portal master ability. And what you can do is you can pick any pillar in the dungeon, that's the gray cubes, and you can move it the width of the card. Which allows you to basically rearrange one corner of a triangle to optimize your pickup. There is another ability, I saw someone else on this, where you can pick 2 monsters that are near each other, stack them up, and then flick them. Right? There's another ability to flick a pillar. So some of these abilities that you flick different kinds of things. That can be very powerful because if there's this really great pickup you want to get, but let's say there's a monster in the way, being able to, the ranger has the ability to flick monsters, right? Because of the bow. You can flick the monster out of your cube and now you can pick it up, right? There's some other cool abilities that deal with beyond the dungeon's edge. So what that means is when you're looking at the dungeon, you're going to notice where all the pillars are, right? And you're eventually, once you start staring at this long enough, you start to sort of see there's sort of a perimeter of gray pillars where non-gray pillars have moved past the outermost gray cubes. Non-gray cubes have moved past the edge of that, right? So you can never make a triangle for those guys, right? Because eventually they all move outside past the edge of the pillars, and you can never pick those up. But there are some cool character abilities that you do things beyond the edge of the dungeon. Sometimes flick them. I had a character that lets me pick up all the cubes that's at the edge of the dungeon and redrop them, which is kind of neat. So they've got some interesting mechanics in there to sort of fix some of the things that potentially could go wrong or be frustrating. Like, oh no, all the cubes are stuck outside the gray cubes. What do? Well, you have these abilities to move the cubes around. You can redrop them. The other thing that starts to happen is you start to learn, like, as you drop those 3 new cubes every round, if you're strategic about where you drop them, not only are you adding these new cubes, but you're knocking other cubes around, right? So you're kind of rearranging the dungeon. So you're trying to optimize that also. So that's so basically that's your turn, right? So you're basically going to drop 3 dice into the dungeon, add to the dungeon. You're going to activate one of your abilities, and then you're going to pick a triangle and pick up all the stuff in the triangle. And then you're going to just apply the effects of the triangle. Next player's turn. It's just that simple, right? Really, really simple game. What's interesting is I played it with Seppi, and Jeff, and one of the gentlemen. I apologize, I'm forgetting his name. I'm sorry. We had a really fun time, and it was funny because they kept saying, like, man, this is such a great idea. Why didn't I think of it? You know, it's one of those games where you're doing it, and it's like, this is so much fun and it's so different. And then I played it last night. I got to hang out with Dan/Doc, aka Doc from our D6G Roleplay Charisma show, and his kids were with him. And so we ran it with him and his kids. And I was really curious to see if they were going to enjoy it. And they really did. They actually wanted to go buy it. I think they're going to run back today and buy it. We had a great time with it, and it worked really well at their age. They did feel, the reason I brought this up was they were saying, why is it taking so long? Like they were anxious to take their turn. Your turn is literally seconds. There's a little bit of analysis paralysis, and it's not really that long compared to the games, honestly. But there's a little bit of analysis process. You look at your options, right? You look for those triangles. And I think the kids were all like, try to get super thinky about it, which was fun. But then the kids who turn it wasn't were kind of like, grr, where's my turn? You know, but they had a great time. I think they really enjoyed it. So a couple of the things I should note though about the game. So after this other mechanic is pretty interesting too. There's a bit of a catch-up mechanic. So, the player order initially is done by initiative, which is based on just numbers that are printed on your character cards. But after the first round, so after each player's had a turn to pick up, a couple things happen. One, we've got to re-establish the turn order. And the way you do that is you check weight. And what you basically do is you count up all the treasure cubes each character has currently collected. And whoever has the least cubes is player 1, and then it goes to the most heaviest player. So basically, whoever got the less stuff gets to go first, which is kind of interesting. Right. So you're going to, and the other thing that happens each round is you're going to activate the monsters again. So you're going to turn over another monster card. So another giant monster gets added. And this could be additive because the other monster may not have been killed and usually isn't. So now you've got 2 monsters and both the abilities on the monster cards activate. So they do more things, right? Some of these things, again, are damaging. Some of them just sort of rearrange the dungeon a little bit, which is kind of neat. So those guys both go. The monsters all go, and then the players start again. And the game is short. There's only 3 rounds. That's all there is to it. So you do that whole thing once, you do the whole thing twice, you do the whole thing a third time, you're done. That's it. And that really is dungeon drop. And then at the very end, you're just going to count up your victory points. And the way you do that, again, now everybody reveals those quest cards they had to show the value of all the gems they got. And then but there's those other things too, like maybe you killed some trolls, maybe you killed one of the big monsters who got their own special victory conditions. Maybe you killed... maybe you got some chests with keys, and that became a big thing for the kids. The kids love the ideas of chests and keys. There is a mini game expansion I just picked up and haven't tried yet where there's a it includes a little card with a dexterity game on it to try to pick the chest's lock, where you flick cubes on it. So if you want to have that instead of just having keys, probably a little bit of unnecessary complexity. It's probably better just the key chest combo, but kind of neat. But yeah, the kids really like the chest idea and trying to get the keys to match the chest. They thought that was pretty fun. They started trying to make the triangles for that, which I think are pretty smart because, those D6 treasure rolls could be a pretty big deal. And the highest score I saw was actually Dan's daughter got the best. Got 27 points, the most I've seen so far, which is pretty impressive. So yeah, Dungeon Drop. I really enjoyed this. Everybody I play it with now. So 3 other adults, just random actually game designer types, honestly, game designers and publishers. Those guys, plus Dan and his family, everybody liked it. So this looks like a winner. Dungeon Drop. Looking forward to trying it with my family when I get back home. So there you go. That is my Gen Con report. I had a great time. No regrets about coming, and looking forward to more cons in the future and reconnecting with more of you out there. So thanks for listening. Happy gaming, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@thed6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.